In every human being, there lies a quiet, untouched dimension, a depth of being that exists beyond the stream of thought. Eckhart Tolle often calls it the transcendent dimension of consciousness. It cannot be grasped through reasoning, nor captured in a definition. It can only be known directly, silently, in the spaces between thoughts, in the stillness that remains when the voice in the head finally pauses. Tolle reminds us that most of humanity lives as if trapped inside their own minds, lost in a dense forest of mental noise. Thoughts chase thoughts. Emotions react to those thoughts, and the cycle perpetuates itself endlessly. We become the noise we cannot escape. The mind narrates everything, comments on everything, anticipates, resists, remembers. And in that constant inner commentary, the luminous simplicity of the present moment is buried. He calls this state object consciousness. It is the habitual identification with form, with things, with situations, with opinions, with emotions. It's the lens through which we perceive the world and ourselves. And because the lens is clouded with fear, desire, and memory, everything we see is distorted by that conditioning. The result is a life lived in a dream, a waking sleep that feels normal only because it is universal. The ordinary human condition, Tolle says, is one of unconsciousness, not in the medical sense, but spiritually, meaning that the person is so completely identified with their thoughts that they are unaware of the deeper dimension of awareness itself. It's as though the sky has forgotten that it is not the clouds passing through it. Awareness remains ever present, but the mind believes it owns the sky. Every emotion, every opinion, every reaction becomes infused with a false sense of I. We say I think, as though we were the authors of every thought. But in truth, thoughts appear by themselves. They arise from the collective field of the human mind, conditioned by past experience, memory, and culture. To say I think is like a leaf saying I move the wind. Yet this illusion of authorship is the root of ego. And so the stream of thinking, with its judgments, expectations, anxieties, and desires, becomes the invisible prison. Humanity, Tolle explains, lives as if under hypnosis. The ego is the trance. It whispers, "You are what you think. You are your story. You are your achievements. You are your pain." And because this voice speaks with such authority, we believe it. But belief itself is the veil that hides being. He points to a simple but radical discovery. That which notices the thought is not the thought. That which witnesses the emotion is not the emotion. There is a deeper awareness in you that is prior to all content, an open, spacious field of consciousness in which thoughts arise and subside like ripples on an ocean. This is what he calls space consciousness, the formless awareness that allows form to be. To awaken, then, is to shift identification from the form to the formless, from the objects within awareness to awareness itself. The spiritual path is nothing other than this reversal of attention. It is not about adding something new, but about seeing what has always been there, hidden beneath the noise of the mind. Awakening is subtraction, not addition. Tolle often illustrates this by inviting us to listen not just to the words being spoken, but to the silence between them. The space between words is not empty. It is alive. It is consciousness itself. Just as sound cannot exist without silence, thought cannot exist without stillness. The stillness is primary. It is the background that allows everything to be. When we begin to notice this background, even for a brief moment, something extraordinary happens. Thought loses its dominance. The gravitational pull of the mind weakens. There is a gap, and in that gap, the light of awareness enters. For a split second, you are no longer a bundle of reactions. You are presence itself, aware of awareness. Tolle calls this the beginning of the awakening process, the realization that you are not the voice in the head, but the awareness behind it. Once this recognition occurs, even partially, life begins to change from within. You still think, you still act, but a subtle detachment arises. The world continues, yet it no longer defines you. There is now space within. He reminds us that the essence of all spirituality is contained in that single recognition. It is the one thing, the discovery of your own formless essence. Everything else, every ritual, belief, or technique is a pointer. The finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. The words are not the reality. Reality reveals itself only in stillness, never in concepts. But this awakening is not merely a philosophical idea, it's a shift in how we live. Without awareness of this deeper dimension, the personality dominates. The me and my life story becomes the center of existence. The ego becomes obsessed with solving itself, yet it is the very problem it tries to solve. It seeks completion through future attainment, through relationships, through recognition, through success. And yet, whatever it gains, the sense of insufficiency always returns. Something is missing again. Why does it always return? Because the ego lives by identification. It can only exist through contrast, through separation. It needs something to want, someone to blame, something to fix. It thrives on problems, even spiritual ones. The mind loves drama because it keeps the false self alive. As Tolle humorously observes, many people turn their own lives into a lifelong project of me. The project never ends because its foundation is false. Modern culture amplifies this illusion. We curate idealized versions of ourselves online, pretending that everything is fine, that we're living our best life, even when we're suffering inside. The ego becomes digital, immortalized in pixels of self-promotion. Behind every overexposed smile lies the same unspoken unease, the same restlessness of the unawakened mind. This is why, he says, even in moments of success, people feel hollow. They've gained the world but lost themselves. The eye they'd been polishing all along was only a mask. Beneath it, the silent depth of being waits patiently, untouched by the ups and downs of circumstance. That silent depth is who you truly are. So how do we rediscover it? Not through effort, not through belief, but through attention, pure, choiceless awareness of the present moment. When you become aware of the silence between sounds, or the space in the room around you, or the gap between two thoughts, you are touching that same essence. It's not distant or mystical, it's here, now. Tolle says this recognition cannot be taught, it must be remembered. The words are merely catalysts. In the instant you realize that you are aware, you've already entered that dimension. Even if it lasts only a few seconds, it plants a seed that begins to dissolve the ego from within. Awareness is the solvent of illusion, the quiet fire that burns away everything unreal. And yet, obstacles inevitably arise. The mind resists silence. It fears disappearance, because the end of the false self feels like death. The ego will distract you, seduce you with thoughts, or claim ownership of your spiritual progress. I am becoming enlightened, it says, unaware that enlightenment is the absence of I. Tolle invites us to meet these obstacles with compassion and humor. The conditioned personality is not an enemy, but a teacher. Every irritation, every craving, every disappointment reveals the places where identification still operates. Life itself becomes the mirror of consciousness, showing us where we still confuse the ripple for the ocean. He also reminds us that awakening does not mean abandoning the personality. You still function as a person. You still have preferences, opinions, and roles, but they no longer imprison you. You can use the personality as a tool rather than being used by it. You become transparent to the light of consciousness, living as awareness through form. And then, paradoxically, life on the surface becomes lighter. The same situations that once created anxiety or frustration lose their grip. Relationships become less about need and more about presence. You begin to sense that the real purpose of life is not to add more content to the story of me, but to awaken from the story altogether. The real liberation, Eckhart Tolle says, begins the moment you no longer look to the world for salvation. When you stop seeking fulfillment in things, people, or experiences, a quiet joy begins to rise from within. It's not dependent on conditions. It is the joy of being itself, the stillness that was never lost, only overlooked. At the core of this realization lies a profound paradox. When you stop trying to escape yourself, you transcend yourself. When you stop striving to become, you remember that you already are. The deepest peace is found not by adding anything, but by letting go of everything that hides it. Tolle says that all humans are born with a subtle sense of lack. It is the evolutionary pull toward awakening, the unease that drives every form of seeking. At first, this longing is misdirected outward, toward possessions, relationships, or achievements. But eventually, when the outer forms fail to deliver lasting satisfaction, consciousness begins to turn inward. The longing becomes a doorway. This is why, he explains, even suffering has a sacred function. It brings the false self to exhaustion. It breaks the identification with form. When every external pursuit fails, the mind surrenders, and what remains is the silence that was always there. Pain becomes the catalyst for presence. It dissolves resistance and makes space for awareness to emerge. He observes that many people unconsciously seek self-transcendence through substances, distractions, or addictions. Alcohol, drugs, thrill, or work. All these offer temporary relief because they momentarily silence the mind. The voice in the head quiets down, and for a brief time, one feels light, unburdened, free. But the peace doesn't last, because it's borrowed from something external. When the effect fades, the mind returns louder than before. What people are truly longing for, he says, is freedom from themselves, from the incessant thinking, the constant judgment, the endless pursuit of becoming. And that freedom cannot be found by adding more experiences. It is found only in the recognition of awareness itself. He offers a simple practice. Notice the space between two thoughts. The instant you become aware of the gap, you are no longer thinking, you are awake. That gap is the living presence of consciousness. It cannot be seen, but everything arises within it. Space is prior to form, just as awareness is prior to thought. The space between thoughts is a window to eternity. In that realization, something extraordinary occurs. You begin to sense yourself not as a fragment moving through time, but as the still field in which time appears. You are the sky, not the weather. You are the ocean, not the waves. You are the timeless background against which every experience unfolds. The recognition changes your sense of identity forever. And from that state of spacious awareness, life becomes profoundly simple. The future no longer dominates your attention, because you see that every future moment can only be experienced as now. The past loses its heaviness, because you realize it exists only as memory in the mind. Everything collapses into presence, and in presence, there is no problem. This is the essence of Eckhart Tolle's teaching, that your life situation, your relationships, finances, health, may have importance relatively, but what matters absolutely is your state of consciousness. The outer world mirrors your inner state. To awaken is not to escape the world, but to see it without distortion. To live as consciousness is to live in freedom. He reminds us that the ego will continue to appear. Thoughts will still arise, emotions will still move through you, but now they happen within the vastness of awareness, and so they lose their power. The movie continues, but you are no longer lost in the screen. You've remembered that you are the light that makes the movie possible. This realization, once tasted, changes everything. The ordinary becomes sacred. The sound of the wind, the space of a room, the pause between words, all point to the same stillness. Life becomes meditation. Every encounter becomes an opportunity to recognize yourself in the other. Every moment becomes an expression of the one consciousness looking at itself. Tolle calls this shift from the surface I to the deep I. The surface I is the personality, the story of me and my life. It is fragile, time-bound and perpetually unsatisfied. The deep I is timeless, silent, vast, the awareness behind all experience. It has no history, no fear, no desire. It simply is, radiant and untouched by circumstance. When you rest as this deep I, the search ends. You no longer need the world to complete you, because you are already whole. And paradoxically, this is when you can finally enjoy the world without clinging to it. Relationships become play rather than dependency. Work becomes expression rather than struggle. Even pain becomes part of the dance of form. This is not detachment in the cold sense, but a luminous freedom. You can fully participate in the world while knowing that nothing can truly add to or subtract from who you are. The wave rejoices in its movement because it knows itself as the ocean. Joy is now unconditional, arising from the depth of being itself. From this recognition arises compassion, because you see yourself in everyone. Every angry person, every addict, every dreamer is consciousness temporarily lost in its own reflection. To see that is to forgive the world, because you see that ignorance is not evil. It is simply unconsciousness. The light has momentarily forgotten itself, and your awareness becomes the reminder. Eckhart Tolle's message, though simple, carries the power to end suffering at its root, not by fixing the story of your life, but by realizing that you are not the story. You are the awareness in which the story appears. The awakening of this realization in one human being is the beginning of a new earth, not in the future, but now. And so, the invitation remains timeless, to listen beyond the words, to sense the silence that holds them, to feel the stillness behind all movement. Because in that stillness you remember who you truly are, consciousness itself, untouched by thought, free from time, eternally present. That is the space consciousness Eckhart speaks of, the infinite home within. That is the end of seeking and the beginning of life. When the mind grows quiet and the inner space opens, existence reveals its natural beauty. Ordinary moments become holy, simple acts shine with meaning, and even silence feels alive. The world has not changed, your perception has. Awareness has stepped out of the dream. In this state, gratitude arises without cause. You find yourself thankful for sunlight, for breath, for the sound of rain. Life no longer needs to prove itself worthy of your presence. You simply live as the presence itself. Each day unfolds with quiet purpose, guided not by fear or ambition, but by spontaneous intelligence flowing from stillness. The paradox of awakening, Tolle says, is that nothing external changes, and yet everything does. You may still have responsibilities, you may still face challenges, but they no longer define your inner state. The background of peace remains untouched. The forms come and go, but the formless stays. You begin to live as eternity, wearing the mask of time. This is why Eckhart Tolle's teaching continues to resonate across cultures and generations. It doesn't ask you to believe, to convert, or to escape the world. It simply invites you to awaken to the reality that is already here, the silent awareness that witnesses all experience. The miracle is not somewhere else. It is the consciousness watching these words right now. And in that recognition, a subtle joy arises, not the joy of having, but the joy of being. You realize that every problem the mind ever created dissolves in the light of now. Nothing was ever missing, only attention was misplaced. When attention returns home, the world is renewed, and even the smallest gesture becomes sacred. Tolle's words are not meant to be memorized, but lived. They point toward direct experience, to the awareness behind perception, to the presence behind thought. Each time you pause and sense the stillness beneath your breath, you are entering that dimension. The awakening is not in the future. It is this very instant, seen without the veil of thought. And so, the essence of his message can be condensed into a single invitation: be still. Know that you are. Everything else follows naturally. Out of that stillness comes clarity, compassion, and effortless action. The world transforms when even one person chooses presence over projection, silence over noise, awareness over thought. When you begin to live this way, the boundaries between sacred and ordinary dissolve. Washing a dish, listening to a friend, walking through a crowded street, all become expressions of the same consciousness unfolding itself. The ego's restlessness softens into ease. You are no longer chasing moments, you are inhabiting them. The seeker dissolves into the scene. Eckhart often says the purpose of life is not to add more to yourself, but to realize what you are beneath everything you've added. The world tells you to become somebody. Awakening shows you the freedom of being nobody in particular. In that nobodiness, love blooms naturally, unconditioned and vast, free of grasping or fear. When awareness becomes your home, even suffering transforms into grace. You see that pain, loss, and uncertainty are not punishments but invitations to go deeper. They strip away what was never truly you. The old self dies 1,000 quiet deaths, and what remains is timeless, radiant, indestructible. Out of that death comes peace beyond understanding. Tolle reminds us that awakening is not an escape from humanity, but its fulfillment. The awakened person does not withdraw from the world, but acts within it with effortless compassion. Their peace is not fragile. It embraces both joy and sorrow. Their silence is not absence. It hums with life. They become a still point in a spinning world. Through such individuals, consciousness begins to recognize itself collectively. A new earth is not a place but a realization, a civilization built not on fear and competition, but on awareness and cooperation. Each awakened human adds to this field of presence, quietly transforming the collective vibration of the planet. The beauty of Tolle's message is its simplicity. You need not travel to a monastery, study scriptures, or seek distant masters. Everything you need is here, the present moment, your own awareness, and the willingness to be still. Each breath is a teacher, each silence a doorway, each pause an entrance into the eternal. So whenever you find yourself lost in thought, remember, notice the gap. Between one idea and the next, there lies the infinite. Between one heartbeat and the next, there lies peace. Between every moment, there lies the timeless dimension of your own being. That is the truth to which all great teachers, including Eckhart Tolle, point. The mind will forget, that is its nature, but awareness never forgets itself. It waits patiently for your attention to return home. And when it does, you realize you were never truly lost. You were dreaming, and now you are awake. You smile, not because everything is perfect, but because perfection was never needed. Presence was enough. In this understanding, the world regains its innocence. The trees, the clouds, the laughter of children, all radiate the same still life that breathes through you. The separation between observer and observed collapses. There is only one vast field of consciousness, playing as many forms. You are both the wave and the ocean, the sound and the silence. And finally, as Eckhart Tolle would say with a gentle smile, this moment is all there is. The rest is commentary. When that is seen, life becomes effortless. You rest in the unshakable peace of being, watching the play of form with wonder and love. This is the end of seeking. This is the beginning of life awake.